Hey guys, welcome to Southern Comfort and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to my kitchen. Today we're going to be canning gold mine string beans. I'm going to show you how. So here we've got our gold mine string beans. They've already been washed, they've been snapped, and as I'm going through this, as I'm putting them into the jars, I'll still be looking at them to see if there's any defaults of beans that maybe I haven't snapped, or like little ends on there. Any places onto the string beans, I want to be sure it's not going to be going into my jars. Over here I've got my quart jars. I'm going to be using quart jars, and for quarts we're going to be going for 25 minutes. Now pints will be going for 20 minutes. So we've got our funnel here, we've got our jar holder here, we've got our debubbler over here, we've got our napkin that we're going to be using to wipe the top of the jars off. I'll put some vinegar in here. I like to use vinegar. It cleans the top of the jar really well. To me, it has a tendency to, maybe it's in just me, but I believe it creates the seal even better than using just water. I'm going to be using an All-American canner. Once that canner is filled up, the All-American, then I'll be using this electric canner, which works super great because usually I'll have jars that can go ahead already into the canner, so I'm starting up another All-American canner. So we've already got this canner right here ready to roll, so that when we fill up the All-American canner, then we can go ahead and fill this canner up, and it makes it really super easy. I really enjoy doing it this way, so I was having two canners going onto the stove with all that heat and all that steam, because it's like about 98 degrees outside today. Now when I'm doing my canning, I like to use an electric kettle here to get my hot water. When I put this hot water in here, as you can tell, it's heating up. It makes those jars super hot. It heats them right on up, and I'm going to show you how I do string beans. So the first thing I always do is go ahead and put the salt into the jars. I'm using 1 teaspoon of salt. Now I'm using canning salt. You can use plain salt and that works perfectly fine, but you don't really want to use iodine type salt because it can make your jars cloudy. Now if you're using a product that is like maybe mustard greens, you're not going to really see the water to make it cloudy. So I always suggest using either the can salt or the plain salt. But I always put my salt in there first, because if I don't, I have a tendency to forget it. Now you don't have to use salt if you don't want to. Maybe you're onto a diet that cannot, your body cannot take all the salt, or you need to cut down on the salt. You do not have to put the salt into the jars. The salt is actually working as a preservative. So we have our canners all heated up and ready to go. Now I do my canning a little bit differently than most people, because I've canned tons of jars and I've learned this on my own. And one of the things I like to do, I just don't, when I first started canning, everybody says to, fill the jars up. Well, I found out that when I do that, I have a hard time debubbling, and I have a hard time getting my debubbler down in there to get the air bubbles out. So what I do is, like, the first thing I do, either is my electric canner over here, my electric kettle over here is heating up, then I'll go ahead and put some string beans in there, and then I'll put my water. But first thing I like to do is take and put some water in there, then put some string beans, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. So let me get my kettle. So we can see this water right here is screaming hot, and it will heat these jars up really quickly. It actually takes a step out of canning for me, because trust me, this is hot. So while it's just sitting there, this jar is I can't even hardly touch it down there. It's heating this whole entire jar up. So one of the things I do is that, and like I said, I need to look. I watch while I'm filling my jars, but I don't just kind of dump it in there. I take and I drop my string beans in there, and then I like to go ahead and start debubbling. It helps these string beans to move around in there. It gets the air bubbles out, gets these beans situated. Because the thing of it is, if you don't get the debubbling done good, then it's going to create these air pockets, And then when you're canning, then what's going to happen, these beans are going to move around and your water level is going to drop. Now you can have string beans up here showing, and that's fine. You know, eventually the color can change a little bit. It's no big deal. It's not going to hurt anything. But I find doing it this way just makes my canning session a lot easier. So I'm going to continue filling these string beans up into this jar right here. At the same time, I am debubbling and situating these string beans, because, you know, when the string beans come in different sizes, they're going to go in this jar different ways, and this helps them to get settled out. Another thing that I do that I'm fixing to show you is that, and even at the, see, I'm still situating these beans. I'm going to show you is that I don't fill my string beans way up here, because we're going to be going to the 1-inch mark. The books tell you to go to 1-inch mark, but when you go to 1-inch mark, what happens, it creates you to have less liquid, less water into your jar. And then when it's processed and all this is moving around, some of that's going to, that moisture, that water is going to come out, and then you're not going to really say have enough water in there, and it can create your beans up here not to be covered into the water. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just it actually looks prettier if you do it the other way. But what I have learned through this canning process, and this is a wide mouth jar, and it's a lot easier. I really started switching to at one point buying wide mouth jars than just the regular. And also I take my snap beans and I snap them into bite-sized pieces, because I find that it goes into these jars a lot easier. Into my funnel, it falls down, and I'm not, you know, trying to situate all these beans in here. Now, when it used to be that I would take and fill these jars up, and then at the top you got to, when you get to the top, you're trying to situate those beans to get them to settle down a little bit. And I find out this is through my canning experience, doing it this way, it's kind of like killing two birds at one stone. You're debubbling and you're situating these beans. So filling it up with water helps these string beans to get settled down. It helps them to get situated. Now I'm not going to go all the way up here to the 1-inch mark. And I'm looking at that. That's like see, you're always looking at your beans to see if there's something you want to take out. That was just the end of the bean. But through my canning experience, I like to stop right there. So I was filling it up to the 1-inch mark, and then fill it up with some water. What this is going to do, we're going to go to the 1-inch mark, which is that first little ridge right there. What this does is, you see how you still got some, you got some place in there, space in there. What this does is still help these beans throughout this jar to move around, get good, you know, all the air bubbles are coming out and get situated in there, because you don't want to pack it to where then you're not going to get any water in there. It's just not going to have enough water, because you want enough fluid in there, or liquid, or water in there, so that when you're processing, these beans are going to be processed evenly. So we've already got that debubbled, and I do believe in debubbling. I take the time to debubble. I guess it's just from my experience. Taking a little bit more time always works. Another tip that I always do also, sometimes I won't fill it all the way up, all the way to the 1-inch. I'll drop it a little bit. And then, because I'm looking at my beans right here, because I might need to add some more to take up that space, because you don't want too many beans in there, and you don't want too less of beans in there. You try to look at it and draw that balance there to where it's not overfilled, but it's not underfilled also. So that looks good to me. And then what I do is I take, and you can take, because this is just water, you can just take a paper towel, but I like to take a paper towel or napkin and wipe the top of it off with vinegar. And then what I'm going to do now is put my ring and my lid on. Our canner is heating up over there, and really the water will be about the same temperature as what's inside this jar. And then now we just go set it into our All-American canner. I'm not saying going half of the jar. I just go, you know, not half, but a little bit below half when it comes of filling my jar. So once again, letting these beans gradually drop in there helps get them situated. Kind of pushes out those air pockets that can be in there. And I always like to go in there and start debubbling. And that's moving those string beans around. To me, it's just faster. It seems like it's a little bit more work, you know, by doing it this way. But then again, it's not, because when you get to the end, if you fill this jar up, then you got to take the time. You got to work yourself in there to get the air bubbles out. When it gets to right here, it's kind of like the jar goes up and it starts curving. When it gets to that curve, that's when I want to stop, put my string beans in. And sometimes I'll add a few. I'll just look at the water level and see if I can judge it to see if I need to add any more. Sometimes I'll add 2. I can go ahead and debubble right now. Still going to move those string beans around. I find out by not filling it up to the jar, it just works out better for debubbling. It works out in the long run at the end of the canning process. Now I'm looking at this. I didn't quite hit it at that ridge right there. From here to the top of the jar is 1 inch. And it's a little bit below that. Sometimes I'll go below it because I'm looking at, can I add some more string beans in there, right? And if you debubble, if you debubble real good, then most time there's air pockets in there. I even go into the middle. There's air pockets in there, and this water level, it's already dropped even more. If I had stopped, then I would have some more air pockets in there. And now I can go ahead and add some more string beans in there, and it'll bring this water level up. Because I'm seeing that I got a little bit of gaps in there. I don't know if you can see it's hot. I'm gonna do this again. There's a little bit of air, see a little space in there? That's telling me I can add a couple more beans in there to take up that space, which is going to bring my water level up. And that looks good to me. So I got enough space. I'm not got my jar overpacked, and it's giving the beans enough space in there to process evenly. When you are debubbling and you see that water level not going down anymore, then that means you've pretty much got the air bubbles out. So I can, with regular jars and wide mouth jars, whatever I got, finger tight. I followed the Ball's Blue Book USDA that my grandmother had, my mother used, and I find I can who knows how many jars, and I don't have failures. And every long time I might have one that doesn't seal, and it could be the lid, it could be the jar, you know, it could have been the canning process, it could have been a grain of food in there, it could be those things. So, but my way of doing it that I find works out, because my strength is probably not like everybody else's into my hands. When you deal with men and women, it's not going to be the same. So I don't believe that the tightening process is the same for everybody. So when I started canning, it kind of confused me, because I was like, it said finger tight, finger tight, finger tight. Well, what in the world is finger tight? I mean, you go like that, and that's it, you know, and or do you hold a jar and do like that? So when I seen that into the USDA canning book that my grandmother had, and it had in bold letters, firmly tight. Now I mean like, you know, tight, over tight. And I just, you know, like that. That to me is firm. It's not over tightened, and it's not too loose. To me, it's perfect, like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish filling these jars up, and then we're gonna be ready to can. So while my electric kettle is heating up, sometimes I go through this and I'm waiting, right? So I'll go ahead and take my jars, drop the water in there, and I'll put some at the bottom because it'll be very easy once I pour the water in there to get these beans situated down there, because you see when you don't put water in there, they kind of just start piling up. And so while that electric kettle is heating up, I'll just put some beans into these jars right here. I'm always looking at my beans. Oops. Notice that I am letting them gradually just fall in there. So while I'm waiting for the electric kettle to heat up, these are some that I canned yesterday. Take notice into the difference of the water level. That one's a little bit lower, but look, you see that my beans are covered in water. So take notice in this one. See what happens eventually. Now, I don't know I'm not sure exactly what happened. Maybe just not enough air got in there. Maybe too many beans. But you see how the water is not covering the top of the beans. And it's not going to hurt anything. It's just that the color is going to be different gradually. Now those little bit of air bubbles are going to settle down. And the reason I was shaking it is to take and try to move those beans. Sometimes I'll do that. I'll shake the jar and move it around to see if I can get those beans to settle down. I know I'm shaking the camera. Settle down so the water will be covering those beans. All the air bubbles will go away. But if you can take notice, those beans are more so covered in the water. It could have just moved in at the processing time. Because these vegetables are going to be moving around. So all these jars have been placed into the canner, into this All-American canner here. It has dials, so you have to line it up, and you're going to tighten in one section at a time. This side and this side, this side and this side, this side and that side. And I always suggest looking around this between the lid and this canner bottom here, and make sure it's level, because if you don't, what would happen is if it's not level, the steam's going to leak out, and it's not going to build pressure like it's supposed to, and it won't hold the pressure like it's supposed to, and it takes longer into the canning, even if you can get it to hold. So I always look around, make sure my top here, my canning top here, is leveled all the way around before I completely tighten these down. Now I've got this set on high, and what's going to take place, this is going to build steam up, and this vent over here, it's going to blow steam out. When it starts blowing steady steam out, then I'll set my timer for 10 minutes. When that timer goes off, then I will put my weight on right there, and then it's going to build pressure up, and we're going to be going for 10 pounds of pressure into my area. 10 pounds, you got to make sure that your area of pressure is in your area what it's supposed to be. In my area on the southeast coast of North Carolina, is 10 pounds of pressure. So that's where we're at right now with the canning process. We're just going to wait for this vent here to build up steam and blow that steam out so we can put our weight on. So now we're at the place that the pressure is going to build up to 10 pounds of pressure. And this is where you watch it very, very, very careful. I'm watching it, I'm seeing it's building fast today. A lot of that has to do with the outside weather. If it's hot outside, which it is, and it has a tendency to create the pressure in here to build faster. So we're going to wait for this to get to 10 pounds of pressure, and then we're going to cut our heat down some, and then we're going to set our timer. Into the electric counter here, we got 10 minutes. It's venting at this point in time. Now it's 9, and then it will let me know when. It'll beep a couple times. It'll let me know when to put the regulator on. We have 5 quart jars into this canner. We can see that those bubbles have gone down, and with that little bit of shaking, it has created that water to cover the beans. We are at 10 pounds of pressure. We can hear this building more and more steam here. I'm going to cut it down. That always lets me know. We're going to cut that down. We're going to set our timer for 25 minutes. Since I cut this down, then this will stop jiggling in just a minute. And after this, we're just going to sit here and watch this. Make sure that this dial up here is staying regulated. Now, this is very critical at this point in time, because if you cut it down too low and that pressure drops too low, then you got to start your timing process all over again. Every stove is different, so you have to make it. You got to get to know your stove. And you've got to do this a little bit to kind of get accustomed to your canner and your stove. And so this has dropped a little bit. It's right at about 10.5. But I cut my dial down about 6.5. Sometimes it depends on what product I've got in here. If I cut it too low, I have to keep it around. When I cut it down from high, it goes down to either number 7 or number 6.5 or around 6. So as this keeps processing, then what happens most of the time is that the canner's pressure, when it gets close to the end of the canning session, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, then the pressure will start building up higher, and I'll have to cut it down just a little bit more. But you definitely got to get to know your canner and your stove to regulate that pressure into the canner. Once you learn that, it just becomes secondhand. So this canner here is beeping because it's telling me to go ahead and put the regulator on. Now the canning process of 25 minutes is starting with this electric canner. I don't have to do anything else with this canner. When it reaches the end of the canning session, then it will beep, and then it'll let me know I don't have to do anything, and then it'll start cooling down, and it'll continue. It'll show on here that it's cooling down, and then when it's completely cooled down, it'll show done onto the canner. And I believe it beeps 1 time or 2 times, but after this, now that I mashed that button, the canning process has started, and I don't have to do anything. Super wonderful. The stove dial is set almost at 6 right at the moment. We're at 10 pounds of pressure, and we have 18 minutes and 19 seconds. So we're going to end our canning session. Our countdown, that's the only thing we got to do now is watch for this to count down. Watch that regulator, make sure that it stays at 10 pounds of pressure. The electric canner over there is going to do its own thing. Don't have to do anything. And then after that, once this timer goes off, then I'll cut the stove off. I'll leave the canner sitting there. It will gradually lose pressure and it will go down to 0, and then I'll let it sit there 5 or 10 minutes, however long, at least 5 or 10 minutes, and let that pressure continue to get out of that canner. And then I'll take the weight off, and then we'll open the canner up and take the jars out and set them over here and let them start to cool down. Excuse me for a minute. So we got 15 minutes of 27 seconds. And that's why I said you got to watch it, because usually at the end of the session, when it gets near the end of that session, the pressure will build up a little bit higher and you'll have to cut it down. So the only thing we got to do after we open up the canner is lay these jars over here on a mat, and then we'll just let them sit there. They'll ping. The lids are sealed, and then we'll just let them sit there for 12-24 hours. Let them cool down. My experience, usually when they're completely it's done, the lids will loosen off some, and we'll take the lids off. We'll make sure that every jar is sealed, and by doing that, I'll touch the top of it, make sure that it's sealed. You'll know if it's not sealed because you mash the top and it'll go up and down, and it shouldn't do that. And so that's the end of this canning session. Raw packing gold mine string beans. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you on to the next video.